Chris, I don't know if you saw this minutes ago. Matt Gaetz withdrew his nomination. Let me ask you a question. Yeah. Was this, do you think there was a 3D chess to this, or do you think things are just unraveling?
No, I won't say unraveling. I will say business as usual in Washington, D.C. That I do think that the House Republicans were like, great, go. And I think, it's also clear that they leaked everything. That they absolutely fucked him, and what goes around comes around. But now you've got, it's kind of an interesting morning because you've got the Hegseth piece, which I read the report last night. What was interesting about it, somebody pointed out, is that there are two reports. There's the actual one that got released, and then there was a redacted version. They kind of released the unredacted version, and certainly not great, but it's not a Gaetz thing. You saw the chart of Gaetz. That was that was wild. So you have that.
And the element of underage changes the dynamic a lot.
Absolutely. And by the way, speaking of underage, you had the whole Cormac McCarthy thing. So
the what?
Cormac McCarthy, the writer who did Blood Meridian.
Yeah.
There was this crazy article in Vanity Fair yesterday, which may have been the worst written thing I read in ages. But in the middle of it, was basically he had a relationship with an underage girl.
His secret muse, Augusta Britt.
Yeah.
Oh wow, I didn't see this story.
Yeah, and a lot of the article doesn't make any sense at all, but it's kind of, it's fucking creepy, and especially in the article, it's described as a romantic relationship, and it's like he was underage. It was fucking right.
Right.
And
right.
You go back to how do you separate an artist's personal life from their work, and but at the same time, you kind of like, I don't know if I want to go back and reread Blood Meridian with that in my mind.
Right.
But a lot of people are kind of, rethinking. So there's that. And then you had both the head of the FBI and the head of Homeland Security duck a mandatory hearing today. And it's the Democrats that lost their mind on it, not the Republicans, because I think they're off to the next thing. But again, it was, and by the way, all of this shit, which I think is good, because I think, kind of, for lack of a better word, the lancing of the pustule and getting all the bad shit out of the body politic and out of the culture. And like, you can't be, none of this is good no matter whose team it on. And by the way, also, I think, like, a really note of grace this week was Nancy Mace did the transgender bathroom thing. Uh-huh. And again, I'm sympathetic to a woman who was raped, not wanting to be in the space with the biological male. I kind of get that. Clearly she's trying to leverage it. But I thought that the representative from Delaware, the transgender, that she handled it really well. She said, yeah, I kind of get it. It's good. Let's cooperate on what we can do. And she kind of really, instead of having this, oh my God, you use my instead of presenting the worst case of trans, which I think happens a lot, especially online, she was like, you kind of go, okay, yeah, she sounds like really cool, and like, let her live her life, and she kind of jumped over a bunch of people.
What's really interesting? I'm so glad that you said that, actually, because many people on the right that I know will often point out that the worst behavior of Black Lives Matter is young white people. The worst behavior of Free Gaza is young white people that are Christians.
Yeah.
And in some cases, even young Jewish kids.
Yeah.
For you to point out, I think it is also true that sometimes the worst behavior of, like, protect trans people is cisgendered young white people. And again, it becomes, we forget that, like, maybe the people who are most affected should take the lead on how best to respond to these things, because it's their issue. You can support it, but if you put yourself front and center on it, it really kind of leaves a bad taste in people's mouths.
Yeah, and I think the upshot of it is that, Nancy Mace wound up looking small and petty about it. And again, I get it. She was raped, and I'm not going to argue that. But she kind of comes off looking small and petty, and again, I'm drawing a total blank for the incoming member.
Yeah, the one that just won in Delaware, right? Yeah. First trans. Yeah.
But she comes off looking magnanimous and normal and kind of like somebody you would want to represent you. And she could have turned this into I'll use the wrong word here, could have turned it into this jihad and I'm being persecuted. I mean, she could have been on CNN and MSNBC and every fucking national news tonight. Then she released the statement, say, yeah, okay, I get it. Let's move on.
Yeah,
right.
And the media would have loved that, right? For their echo chambers. Listen, far be it for me to judge a woman who's been sexually assaulted. There was a really excellent commentary that she tweeted 206 times, I think it was, in the matter of like 36 hours or something. When at the same time, as I actually saw an interview, she went on Scripps TV and the journalist asked, what are you doing about the Boeing employees that were just laid off in your state? She got so she started kind of hurling these insults at the woman for asking her this. Far be it for a journalist to ask you a question that you don't like, I guess. My only sense is that I don't think that bill had anything to do with Nancy Mace's past. I think that had more to do with her future is what that had to do.
I absolutely agree. And she is famous. I'm trying to think how I can phrase this for people that have firsthand knowledge. She is famous for grinding through staff and having a high turnover of staff. And generally, what you find, as did Kamala Harris did too. But generally, when you find that people blow through staff like that, they generally are not good people to work for or good people to be around. And I think that's true in politics. That's true anywhere.
I think it's true anywhere. And I think the thing is, you can look at certain people and be like, oh, that motherfucker's a diva.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's horrible. But I could also look at Nancy Pelosi and be like, oh, gosh, she's probably a diva. Here's the key difference. With Nancy Pelosi, I think there's an air of kind of like getting shit done, or like, you can go somewhere if you worked for Nancy Pelosi. But if you worked for some of these other people that are just divas and want to be like starlets, where are you going to go from there? Because you're not being set up for success. You can put up with a lot of shit from somebody if you know that it's going to advance you. But if you're just there for somebody's ego trip, it's a very different experience.
And I've worked with a bunch of divas. I mean, finding a diva in politics is not exactly a unique experience.
Right.
But they were also loyal and good people and as you said, results oriented. And the diva kind of went along with it. But which is fine. It's acceptable. I mean,
So let me ask you a question. Yeah. Who would you venture a guess will replace Gaetz as the nominee?
The perfect nominee and who won't go because he's not seen as enough line with Trump would have been Asa Hutchinson, who was he was assistant AG, but he was a former prosecutor, governor, two-term governor, very popular of Arkansas. Yeah. But, if you had to look for somebody, I'll create a flyer and say, current governor of South Carolina, Henry McMaster, who started as a assistant U.S. Attorney General, and in the East, he started and actually won a case. It was a fairly significant in terms of law enforcement. It was called Operation Jackpot. By the way, where I'm pulling this out of my brain is kind of scary. But it was called Operation Jackpot. And basically, his was one of the first cases where you could use, if you busted a cartel, if you broke up organized crime, the proceeds, the illegal gotten gains, you could use those to fund your office, fund other things. And it's been much debated and subject to abuse and blah, 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 blah. But Henry was the guy that came up with that. And he's the current, I think this is his third term of governor of South Carolina.
No term limits in South Carolina?
There maybe it's three, but anyway, but he's been there a while. And he was an early Trump loyalist in 2016. I think he was the first governor, Republican governor to go for Trump in 2016. So he's a loyalist. He would be an interesting person because he would be a Trump loyalist. He's got a prosecutorial background. On the other hand, I think being governor of South Carolina is probably a lot more fun than being attorney general. I think being attorney general, my guess is I think Ace would be the best. Henry would be a good choice. By the way, caveat, Asa and Henry are both former clients.
Okay. All right.
But I mean, but I think it's probably going to be some assistant attorney general that's a loyalist and,
So no Cash Patels in the future?
Right. Yeah, no.
Okay. Do you think there are any other potential withdrawals coming down the pipe that you would predict?
Yeah.
Hegseth?
Yeah, Hegseth, depending on where this thing goes. Again, I read the police report, and like most police reports, it's not great. But don't have drunken sex at a conference with a married woman.
Yeah, and she was there with her husband and her kids. So the fact that the idea that this was a drunken affair between the two is very unlikely in my mind. If she was there alone and he said that, hey, we got drunk, we had sex, she regretted it in the morning, it's hard to say. It's a he said, she said. You start adding on she's there with her husband and her kids, because I read a bit about it. I'm like, nah, dude, that's not what happened.
Yeah. I mean, it's so maybe him. And, and I think the fucking battle royale is going to be on RFK Jr.
Yeah, we talked about this a bit this week. Yeah, you want to elaborate a bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a weird alignment because Cory Booker saying, well, he's got some interesting things he's saying.
Right.
And there's kind of a lot of the Michael Pollan, who is the New York Times food guy, who I fucking can't stand. But he was like, it's about time we had somebody. And Bill Maher, I mean, all these, and you kind of go like, are you out of your fucking mind? He said COVID was created in a lab and it exempted Jews, right? And on that alone, unless he wants to say that, before I did that, I shoved, 5 fucking gummies in my mouth and smoked crack, I'll go, okay.
Right,
but
right.
And then he says, yeah, well, I kind of misspoke that. And it was like, yeah, well, I kind of misspoke that. And he's hiking with somebody and he sees somebody's infant and says, don't get them vaccinated. And it's like,
right.
If somebody said that to me, I try to push him down a fucking cliff. So I think, and not to mention the whole bizarre, forget the sexual assault allegations. He's another guy. And the whole bizarreness with the whale head and the fucking bear. I mean, he's insane. And
yeah.
Sorry, but
I have a theory that he actually might be a serial killer.
Would that not surprise anybody?
It wouldn't. The amount of animal decapitation and stuff is that is textbook serial killer behavior. You know what I mean?
By the way, how great would not great, but I mean, how fucking great would that be? And unsurprising, you'd be like, right.
Well, maybe he's the Hannibal Lecter Trump was always talking about.
Yeah, right. But no, but I mean, this is a guy that's absolutely unqualified. And again, not that I have any great love loss for the current HHS people, or any of these people. They all seem to be idiots from California, by the way. But
I mean, the sad thing is two things can be true at the same time. I think most people think that the fix is in and that we're being poisoned and it's being allowed to happen by people that are looking to rotate out of government and into a couple $100,000 a year job. Ironically, Michelle Obama said this and she got bashed at Fox News. Michael Bloomberg tried to tax the hell out of soda in New York and everybody said, you're crushing our freedom. Now suddenly Trump and RFK starts talking about trying to do this stuff. And it's like, oh, okay, you're allowed to do that now. So it's an interesting dichotomy. I don't believe any of it's true. I don't think anything would change at HHS other than allowing the worst things to happen. I don't think anything would improve. I also agree with you that I think that could be a knockdown, drag out brawl. Mostly for the same reason I think another one would be Tulsi Gabbard, because they're both former Democrats and Democrats hate both of them.
Yeah.
And I think those two will be very interesting. Do you think she'll be able to get nominated? I mean, she definitely will be able to just because of the numbers in the Senate. But I don't think she'll get a Democratic vote.
No. And and instinctually, and maybe because she's a Democrat, I am kind of anti her. What are the things, and she's certainly a contrarian, and I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to have a contrarian in that position.
Totally agree.
But honestly, I don't have an opinion to it. But I mean, there's a lot to be said that like maybe the head of the FDA shouldn't go get a fucking big ass job in pharma and rotate that door, and I think the NIH guy that they're talking about, Jay, was it Bacterata?
I didn't see that.
He's basically the guy that got blacklisted off of YouTube and Twitter.
Oh, interesting.
He's a Stanford biologist. I mean, he's certainly well qualified for the position, but he was the guy that said, hey, no, lab leak. It's the lab leak. And that was labeled as misinformation. And, he did damage to his career, which then, now he's kind of riding high with it. He wrote it out. But he would be an interesting guy. So, I'm all in favor of having bomb throwers, frankly, in certain positions. At the same time, I think saying that there's too much shitty food additives and that, we shouldn't be mandating vaccines for certain ages and certain kids. And there's a whole, I get, but the idea that, the level of misinformation and flat out falsehoods and fucking craziness that come out of RFK, you got to go, no. I mean, and again, a couple weeks ago, I talked about the flying saucer thing, that you have a neighbor that believes in UFOs.
Yeah.
And they're really nice, and you kind of agree with a lot of they say, but every time they talk about something, they talk about UFOs, and you kind of go like, I don't want this person in my life. And I think that that's where a lot of these people go. But like, so the Gaetz thing is kind of interesting too, because like the Matt Stollers and Lee Fangs of the world, who are kind of on the populist left, the economic populist left, they were pro Gaetz because of all his antitrust stuff. And there are a bunch of hearings this week. Visa and MasterCard had hearings this week on the Hill. And, Lindsey Graham and Josh Hawley ass fuck these guys. And, and
which is an entirely new position for Phil.
And an entirely new, it's an entirely new Republican position. And I think, by the way, so to speak, that's well played, but it's an interesting, dynamic and the parties are shifting, which is kind of a good shift.
I agree. You said this before, and I think that positive things can come out of negative things come out of positive things. I agree with you. Having bomb throwers is one thing. Having contrarians, I think that's really good. The thing that has concerned me is it, I remember somebody saying one time they liked me working for them because I didn't kiss up and kick down. I think that there is the thing I look for in a contrarian or a bomb thrower is, are they only throwing bombs in one direction? So are they a sycophant to the people above them, but willing to just slaughter everybody who's dedicated under them, who they don't make a ton of money, and they're there for an entire 30-year career. And that to me is a defining difference. But I agree. I think some of these things I like seeing, Visa and MasterCard get raked over the coals for their plus 50% profit margins. I get that. And their sweetheart deals with Walmart while mom and pop shops are going under. The question is, I think you would agree, and I probably have gotten this from you, those hearings are theater. Will they actually write legislation or vote for legislation that goes against what you would say is we're not communists, we believe in capitalism? Well, how do you change the market dynamics then, right? Especially with an incoming administration that has really run on getting rid of regulatory agencies and regulation. I can't square that circle is where I have a trouble. I don't know which part is true and which part is false.
Yeah, there is an old, I'm going to say it's a Milton Friedman idea. Maybe it's a von Hayek or something. But the only reason Visa and MasterCard can be on that kind of level and have monopolies is because of government skewing the playing field. I mean, that's basically it's the libertarian argument, which I don't entirely buy. I think that anybody tries to maximize their profit out of everything and uses any means available to do that. Whether, legal is a line, but fair or unfair. It's unfair competition. Fuck him. Now I'm going to increase my profit. That's just kind of human nature.
And Peter Thiel's whole book 0 to 1 is based on you should be seeking to become a.
Yeah, right. And again, I kind of understand that. And again, I think these things kind of fall of their own weight. I mean, I think it's interesting is that, I mean, I'll stop picking on Elon because he's got his hands full right now. But the billionaires that bought newspapers and tried to run
Bezos
and the guy that owns the LA Times and they tried to run newspapers like they ran their other things, and they're kind of a hot mess. And they're both going, well, all right, we're going to look at this differently now. And by the way, I don't think the difference. I don't think the problem is ideological. They think the problem. They're just going where they think their readership is.
Right.
And it's like Comcast selling off MSNBC and but by the way, I was shocked to see that after the election, the daytime audiences for MSNBC was 60,000 viewers.
Wow.
I mean, like, why keep the fucking doors open?
That explains Joe and Mika going to meet with Trump to try to ingratiate themselves.
Was that like horrible? I mean, it's like, I mean, and like right after, I mean, they're almost comic books, and then they leaked out on CNN. Yeah, the reason was because we were afraid. No, I mean, just save your friggin' show. I mean,
it's because they're all fucking remora fish.
Yeah,
that's all they are. They just swim in the slipstream and they eat what's left over out of the shark's mouth. Like, they're all just remoras. It's all such bullshit.
Yeah.
In the last episode, did we talk about AOC posting on Instagram, "Why did you vote for me and Trump?" to her?
No, we didn't. We didn't, but we've talked about it since.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw there was a gentleman, they actually is a news guy who went to the Bronx and was doing man on the street interviews with people. I was astonished. And I'm sure it was edited to make it seem like more demographically speaking. And there's actually, I'll share it with you. What I can tell you now is they were looking at the biggest shifts to Trump in the states. Where was the biggest shifts? New York State, California. They were the biggest shifts towards Trump. And in the Bronx, they're like, well, why? And one person said, I don't think the country's ready for a woman to be president. Kind of just came right out and said it. Others, though, were very different. And I know that you and I have talked about this before, this kind of merging of extreme left and extreme right to this kind of economic populism that presents differently depending on which side of that extreme spectrum you're on. Robert Wright, I follow. Not a lot of people like him, whatever, but he posts things. I follow him. He wrote, GM just announced a round of layoffs, which, did you see this? This guy that worked at GM for 33 years or whatever got an email telling him that he was fired, laid off. 1,000 workers. But the company reported Q3 earnings that put it on track for record profits this year. Its CEO received $27 million in compensation in 2023. And GM announced a $6 billion stock buyback in June of this year. Did Democrats, was it really as simple as they just missed the writing on the wall? And if they had, it used to be illegal, you couldn't do stock buybacks, or at least the structure of it, there were limitations, right? If they had been fighting that fight, or whoever fights that fight, is that who the winner is going to be in politics moving forward? The one who is the most extreme without seeming socialist or being able to be labeled. That's the beautiful thing about the right, is they've somehow established themselves as so anti-communist that they can do socialist things or say they're going to do socialist things and never get labeled with it. It's the I'm rubber, you're glue shit.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things, which are also kind of going to lead into, I want to get us back to electoral politics too. But yes, to all your points. I think that the economic thing, I've been digging through a bunch of voters and how they shifted. And if you look at the increase of food insecurity since 2021, food insecurity, credit card debt, poverty, and basically when all the COVID, money ran out, that all jumped, and it jumped by like half. While you can say that the market's doing good and the economy's doing good, yeah, it is. But you now make less. Your dollar goes less, which is what it's all about. Your dollar makes less than it did in 2020. and that's kind of a fact. But what happens, I think, with the economy, it's not so much how you're doing, it's you look around and you see the rest of the world. And you see people that you kind of knew and you kind of work with. Again, not in the laptop class, but in like people that work at Walmart, and see that somebody all of a sudden struggling a little bit, and you go, "Ooh, I'm next." And I think a lot of that was the economy. I think when people were talking about, they were talking about their economic fear, not necessarily their economic well-being.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, like the idea that like you can do a $6 billion stock layback and lay off that many people. And there's a bunch of media layoffs too going through the industry. But like the fact that you can do that, I will say resolutely, fuck you. I mean,
100%.
it should be illegal.
Yeah.
I also think what the House passed this week it's a complicated thing. I want to say it's a reauthorization or a reestablishment of an old rule that basically now the president and the attorney general can go after endowments.
House Resolution 9495. I have it pulled up to talk about next.
And monies for NGOs.
Can you hear me, Chris?
Yeah, we're back. Yeah.
I don't know what happened. Did you hear? Yeah, okay. The last thing I heard, you were talking about House Resolution 9495, where they can take nonprofit endowments down, right?
And so if the Trump administration, or frankly the Biden administration or the Harris administration, wants to go after the endowments of Harvard or Stanford, who have these five, if they want to go, I mean, honestly, if I was president, I would say, you know what, University of Pennsylvania is a tax exempt and you guys have been getting a free ride forever. That $50 billion endowment you have, you're going to have to tie 10% of that every year to the school districts in the city where you live. So basically take money from the endowment and give it to public schools in Philadelphia. How popular would that be, right?
Couldn't agree with, University of Texas is the largest endowment in the world, like $78 billion. A lot of it is land, oil land is where they get, but they are nothing but massive hedge fund operations. And we are spending money, giving them tax dollars. There are so many things you could do to destroy that. I would even say you get no money from us. And in order to maintain your tax-free status, you must invest in the local school districts in the state in which you operate, right?
Yeah.
In addition, however, there is a downside, which is if it becomes abused, I could see somebody, let's say on the right, there's going to be a tit for tat. And then somebody on the left is going to say, okay, cool. You know what else is a nonprofit? Churches. And they're not supposed to be talking politics at the pulpit, and they all are. So we can now go after your churches. So I think I haven't read the bill, maybe you have, but I think there should be some very clear guardrails in it because it could be abused.
Oh yeah, and it will be abused if it goes through.
100%.
But again, the idea of something being politically popular, because it's kind of, morally and ethically, it's kind of indefensible. And like, and how will we, and some of the previous arguments against it's like, well, it's not all liquid. Fuck you. And, how are we going to attract top people? It's like, if you've got 25 billion, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, you have business classes and business professors at school. You can't figure out how to operate the business.
Right. But again, I think that is potentially a really popular thing.
Yeah.
And just, I'd be all for it just to watch the bloodletting and the screaming.
Totally.
But, again, like the GM thing, like, the president and CEO and the board of GM should be before fucking Congress.
Absolutely.
And again, I mean, so, all that. So politics to go back.
Yeah, let's go to politics.
So Tony Fabrizio, who was Trump's pollster, his firm also polls for the Wall Street Journal. And if you look at the Wall Street Journal survey, they got the election totally correct. Him and a guy named Tim Saylor, I would say he's a young kid. He's in his 30s, but brilliant guy. And they did a forum this week at the American Association of Political Consultants. And it's a post-election thing. And normally things are okay, and they kind of fall under the category of, then I decided to do something brilliant and hire me. Fabrizio and Saylor talked about what the actual Trump plan was. And it was kind of jaw-dropping. And I would love to say that, like, oh, I saw it. I mean, I I saw pieces of it. Because one of the things that you have when you do this, you have a dashboard and you're allowed to see media buys and spots all over the country. And it's a subscription service that's kind of expensive. But you could see it and I would constantly look at it and you kind of go, isn't that, here's what they did. They realized that the vote was going to be higher than 2016, but probably not to where it was in 2020. They calculated that, but it was going to be closer to 2020 than 2016.
Yeah.
I mean, there's ways to estimate that, figure that out with your modeling. They realized that Trump could not win in the swing states, the electoral states needed for the electoral college, with that 2020 model, with that close to 2020 model. What they did was, and this is the brilliant part, and this is kind of like people in politics talk about it, and you go, nah, fuck it. They decided to change the voter makeup, and they went after their entire target were voters who were low information and low interest. When I say low information, low interest, I don't mean that they were dumb or they were poor or politics is just not that interesting to them. They're not living it like half the country is.
Right.
They poured all their resources and all their targeting into those people, and they had them tiered that there were like mid-level, low interest and very low.
Okay.
Trump won the national election of what we'll call normal voters by +1. They won the mid-level, kind of not really interested in it, by +4, and I believe they won the really low ones by +2. So basically what Trump did is that Trump changed the voter pool. And so, and they did it, I'm going to call it micro-targeting. They went into little niches in places like Nevada and Reno and Pennsylvania and Georgia and North Carolina and advertised just to what these people thought. Here's the trick, and here's why it was brilliant and dangerous, and I can't believe that more people aren't talking about it. These low-interest, low-information voters were swing voters. They were undecided. They could have just as easily been for Harris. They were agnostic about it. They thought everybody's bad, or they thought everybody's good. They were, they kind of closed off the noise. But Trump went out and he persuaded them to vote for him, which is why you saw all these Republicans probably do like guys in Michigan, like Rogers, and in Nevada, like Brown, in Wisconsin, like Hegseth, shouldn't have had a fucking shot. And they came really close to winning because these Trump voters just enlarged the voter pool. This is fundamentally different when Democrats talk about getting out the vote, or Republicans talk about it, but Democrats talk about getting out the vote and grassroots, all that shit. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about there's an existing vote and we're going to squeeze every drop we can. This was creating new voters, and it's kind of mind-blowing because it's world-changing.
So just drill down on that for a second for me. So how did they do that? You said micro-targeting. Was this digital marketing? Yeah. Was this through like digital marketing, or did we miss something throughout the election cycle where he was visiting places? Because I remember him going to places that were super small.
Yeah.
And people saying, why is he going to this small thing? Or was it a combination? Like, how did he get to those people?
It was a combination of things. It was a combination of broadcast buys. And I'll give you a really pretty good example that I don't know for a fact, but again, I see it on my dashboard and I thought, what the fuck are they doing? And I go, okay. So in Nevada, which went to Trump, Las Vegas, the biggest city, is in Clark County. But if you look at Hispanics that work in Clark County, they all work for the casino industry. Big fucking shock, right? They work for the biggest industry. So if you're working for a casino industry, what are your hours? So when do you start watching TV? You're not watching prime time. You're not watching news. You're watching literally like 1 to 4 a.m. That's your prime time. And if you look at, they kind of way overspent. And by the way, it's very cheap then. They way overspent then And frankly, if you're living that kind of lifestyle, you're probably, if you're working for a casino, you're probably making a pretty good living. You're certainly not poor.
Right. It's all unionized in
Right.
Vegas.
Right. And at the same time, your information flow, you're out of the political thing. And so literally they overspent and they poured the majority of their resources into a very small pool of voters to persuade them.
And they knew they weren't going to win Clark County, but that was where she was going to beat the state. That was where she was going to beat them in the state. They just needed to flip enough to reduce her impact on them.
But they did that all over the country. And, my guess is if I went back and I looked at some of their national buys, my guess their national buys also reflected that. When you see shifts in African Americans, African American men, which would kind of fall into the low interest, low information, non-voter thing, they increased that pool too. And I think that even though they weren't targeting in like New York State, for instance, but I think that, just the energy of it and just the kind of the national targeting of it, I think that's where a lot of that was created. And not all of it, and it's a blurry line. But again, they did something new in American politics that, nobody's commented on.
Would another way of saying this be, to a degree, a return to retail politics, looking at the smallest kind of exchanges with people?
That's a really great way to look at it. And actually, I'm gonna write that down because I'm gonna use that in my next pitch. Yeah.
I'm gonna go trademark that real quick.
Right. But no, it is.
But I feel like he did that actually in New York as well. You remember when he did that Harlem rally? I mean, it's not a place where people thought, oh, this is a hotbed of Trump supporters, right? But to the point, some of it is in-person outreach to the people who could give a shit less and think the whole system's rigged anyway. It's like, whatever. And you flip enough of them, you change the dynamic of what, like we said, New York is one of the biggest shifts to the right since 2016.
And I think if you look at what he did and when he did that, the Harlem thing being a good example, it speaks to the campaign and the candidate. Harris having these celebrity-studded events in Democratic hotbeds, which again, the reason you do that is because they're easier to organize. They're easier to get people out and fill the stadium. But kind of doing these kind of made-for-TV events, you kind of look at it and you kind of go, of course, John Bunch, right? It's not news and it's not interesting. Trump going to Harlem, you kind of went, okay, I want to hear this. I want to see this. It becomes interesting. And even if you're not moving African American voters, you might be moving suburban women that don't like either, but they're saying he can't be that bad if he went to Harlem now. And again,
that's right.
Trump lost women. There should have been Trump won men by like 11 and only lost women by 4. And most of the big pre-election surveys had, women double digits.
Interesting. Did you say who was the architect behind this strategy
I think the 3 main people, and I mean, success has 1,000.
Yeah.
But it would be Tony Fabrizio, who's the pollster, Tim Saylor, who was the big data guy, and of course, Chris LaCivita, who was the kind of the general consultant, and Suzie Wiles, who was the campaign manager.
Okay.
But at the forum, it was LaCivita and Tim Saylor. And again, I know, I've known Fabrizio for 40 years almost. And I've known Tim Saylor for a decade, and both are extraordinarily smart, elite smart, in ways that you wouldn't suspect, because you would meet them and you would kind of like, there's nothing professorial or I don't know, airs or Ivy League kind of thing. There's nothing Malcolm Gladwell-y about them.
Yeah.
It's like Mottola, fuck you. I mean, that's kind of what, and again, but they're extraordinarily bright because they look at the world in ways that other people don't.
Yeah.
And, again, I've worked with them in campaigns and they kind of say stuff and you kind of go, oh, fuck, I never thought of it that way, because I'm not that bright. They are, because they look at data all day.
Right. You mentioned her, and I'm just curious, do you know Suzie Wiles at all?
In passing.
Okay. You think she's a good pick to be the chief of staff?
Yeah, I think she's great.
Sweet. First female chief of staff.
Yeah, right. Suzie Wiles kind of falls into that category of, there's an old Philadelphia political boss named Billy Green.
Okay.
And one time late in his career, a reporter asked him, what was the secret of your success? And he said, never write a letter, never throw one away. And that's Suzie Wiles. Suzie Wiles knows a lot of secrets, tells none of them. She did. I had a client named Bill McCollum, who's the Attorney General of Florida, that ran for governor, or ran for the U.S. Senate. Sorry.
Okay.
And Tim Scott, the current senator, was jumped in late in the primary. And I've got Suzie Wiles, track cleats still on my back. They ran a brilliant campaign, and we wound up losing by, I don't know, about not by a lot, by maybe 15,000 votes or something. But they ran a brilliant campaign, and she is all that. But by the way, if you like gossip, this is the best part. So Suzie Wiles worked for DeSantis.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and
during the primaries?
No,
or previously
for governor.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to muck this up a little bit, but she worked for DeSantis for the governor's race. His first governor's race.
Okay.
Which
yeah.
barely won against Gil.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, she goes on the wrong side of DeSantis. And the rumor is DeSantis' wife.
Okay.
So she gets moved to the state party, and she's working for, I think, Ballard Spahr. She's working for one of the Tallahassee lobbying things. They kick her out of the state party, her contract out of the state party, and then they insist that Ballard Spahr fire her. So, who knows who pissed in somebody else's cornflakes, and I don't know. And at the same time, she's getting her husband of, 20 years, 30 years divorces her. So she's a single mom, divorced, and the incoming governor just kicks her ass to the curb, which is how, why she wound up working for Trump.
Wow.
And but literally, different people reached out to her, including the Trump people, and they hired her, and they gave her a living. They made sure she could put bread on the table. But can you imagine being kicked to the curb by Ron DeSantis, and now you're the chief of staff for the leader of the free world, and kiss that fucking ring, right?
I'm sure she was loving the race too if she was running it while he was just beating up on DeSantis and DeSantis was imploding.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's, but again, you never see her in the press. You never, there's a couple pretty good profiles of her, but she's like a pro's pro, and I don't know anybody that's ever said a bad word about her for working with her, which is kind of a rare thing.
And Americans love a comeback story, so I love that, right?
Yeah. I mean, being the gatekeeper to the president from being unemployed, 6 years ago.
Totally. All right, I know we're coming up against time. Quick question. I saw that the race to lead the DNC, we threw out some names before. The new names that I'm seeing, Martin O'Malley, former governor and also the mayor of Baltimore. And Ken Martin, Minnesota. I guess Chuck Rocha, also a Latino Democratic strategist.
By the way, he would be an interesting person. I don't.
Okay.
I think he is wrong about a lot of stuff, but I think he thinks about it in the right way. He's very Latino centric, and he was a Bernie guy. He's an economic populist. He's a Bernie guy, and he's all about Latino voters. I think O'Malley is not a great pick. O'Malley was the governor of Maryland, who couldn't even elect his lieutenant governor.
Can you hear me? Hey, hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Internet's I don't know, something in Texas today. All right, Chris, I know we're going to get you out of here. Any updates on your races? Have the last two been called or no?
San Diego, we lost. They're still counting votes in California 13, which is Duarte and Adam Gray. And Adam Gray is now up, Duarte is now up 300 votes. But I think somebody figured out that they're counting a ballot up there, one ballot every 4 minutes. And again, it really is disgraceful. Because it's not that part of the thing, and not that I have no indication that it's something illegal. There's a scam going on. I just think it's stupid.
That the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania ruled that county could not keep counting illegal ballots. Seems like a good ruling.
Yeah. And the woman was saying, well, that's not what I really meant. I was just full of passion. She made it worse. All
right. Well, just a little heads up. We have gotten some comments on our shorts on TikTok. we were told to cut the nonsense. Responded, letting them know in the state of the current state of the world, I think we're actually the most serious thing global at the moment. So see you in a week and have a good one.
Sounds good, man.
Have it. As I mentioned before, I've gotten some comments, good, bad, and ugly of them all, actually. Cut the nonsense was a good one. I think we do a good job, actually, of providing some insight with some entertainment. If you don't like the insight, I can understand why that would seem it would seem nonsensical. We have a lot of interesting things going on. There was one thing that I wanted to share that I saw. Followed Democrats and Republicans, but from Occupy Democrats, I felt like they had a really interesting holiday post. They wrote on Instagram that they unpacked their nativity scene yesterday, removed all the Jews, Arabs, and foreigners, and ended up with only a jackass and a handful of sheep. I think that deserves a special mention. Also, big that we didn't talk about today. I'm not speaking out of turn here. Chris has said before that he thinks Gina Raimondo is whip smart as Commerce Secretary. Recall he actually thought that she should be the running mate for Kamala Harris. That would have been an interesting ticket. Been a really strong ticket in hindsight. The Biden administration is making every effort to spend the $50 billion that Commerce currently has for the microchip subsidy program before Trump takes office, to push through that key piece of industrial infrastructure legacy. Will it work? We shall see. All right, that's it. And love the comments, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Check us out. Free to like, subscribe, and share our show here. Please leave your comments. We often read them during the show. Okay, thank you. Talk to you soon.
Draft picks in the Senate, game on the floor. Campaign slogans echo final scores. Analysis deep as the trench warfare set. We break it down, no sweat, no net. Highlights and touchdowns, where's your bet? Candidate playbooks, lines we set. Irreverent and free, we call it out. Competition fierce, ain't no doubt. Blitz and a Hail Mary pass. Legislation touchdowns, who's top class? Elections heated, brackets tight. Political fantasy, bring the night. Cynical plays and cynical ploys. Draft your politicians, trade your boys. Tackle the issues, fumble through lies. Only the sharp survive in our eyes. Campaign trails and field goals fade. Winners and losers.